Hello, everyone. Welcome to this special webinar of the Task Force for American Democracy to celebrate the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. I am Mary Smith, President of the Task Force and a past president of the American Bar Association. When Thomas Jefferson penned the Declaration of Independence 250 years ago, the American experiment was unique and improbable. Through the Declaration, the American colonies defied Britain, then the most powerful nation on earth. Jefferson recognized the significance and remarked, "The flames kindled on the 4th of July, 1776, have spread across too much of the globe to be extinguished by the feeble engines of despotism. On the contrary, they will consume the engines and all who work them. The self-evident truth that all men are created equal, endowed by their Creator with the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, remains the foundation of American democracy. As we have seen, our democracy is not self-sustaining. It needs constant tending. Today, our panelists will celebrate this important anniversary, discuss the vision of the founders, and their hopes for the future despite the challenges ahead. So today, I am simply thrilled. We have three of the perfect people to speak on this. We have Judge Michael Ludig. He's co-chair of the Task Force for American Democracy and one of the singular voices today upholding the rule of law and our democracy. He's a former judge on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit. We also have one of the most renowned historians, John Meacham. He is the Caroline and Robert Rogers Chair in the American presidency at Vanderbilt. He has written so many books, including about Thomas Jefferson, and his latest book is called American Struggle, Democracy, Dissent, and the Pursuit of a More Perfect Union, an anthology. A perfect book. I urge you to read it. It's a fabulous book. And finally, legendary journalist Judy Woodruff. She's also a member of the Task Force for American Democracy, and she's a senior correspondent and former anchor and managing editor at the PBS NewsHour, and she's covered every presidential election and convention since 1976. So I am simply thrilled. So welcome all of you. I want to just dive right in. I'm going to start with you, John. Let's set the stage for our audience. How did the Declaration of Independence come to be?
So, if you think about it, we probably should have declared independence in the spring of 1775. Blood is on the ground at Lexington and Concord. Paul Revere is riding around Massachusetts. There's an immense amount of passion. And yet, the predominant number, prevailing number of colonists still considered themselves to be Englishmen, to be protected by and part of the covenant that had really grown out of the 1688-89 period in England, the Glorious Revolution, the Declaration of Rights. It's when William and Mary were brought over to become really the first genuinely constitutional monarchs. And so there was a rule of law. It was a sequential step from Magna Carta into the late 17th century. And there was still hope. John Dickinson, even Benjamin Franklin, others believed that things could be worked out, not least because of the balanced nature of the British Constitution. And if the Parliament went too far, see if any of this sounds familiar. If one branch went too far, the other branch was supposed to stop them. And so the notion was in 1775, this is going too far, Parliament's going too far, but we still have the king. And the king's birthday was still the most significant non-religious holiday in the American colonies in that period. There was great loyalty to George III. And then comes news that George III had hired both German and Irish mercenaries to come to British North America to put down any stirrings of rebellion. That plus the Lord Dunmore's proclamation in Virginia, which called on all enslaved people who took up arms against the non-imperial cause, granted them freedom, began to convince a preponderant number of British North Americans that the covenant they believed they were part of was fundamentally broken. And so then there's more military action heading into 1776. And then Richard Henry Lee stands up in Philadelphia and moves for that Declaration of Independency, which is how it was known in real time.
Well, I was going to ask, how did Thomas Jefferson end up being the main drafter of the Declaration of Independence?
Well,
Did
and I take it that the three of you are part of a subcommittee, and with all respect to your committee, I think the greatest committee ever, and even though it didn't have Judy Woodruff on it, I think the greatest committee ever was Benjamin Franklin, Roger Sherman, Robert Livingston, John Adams, and Thomas Jefferson. That's a hell of a breakout session, right? So that was the session that was the committee that was put together to draft the Declaration of Independence. Wonderfully, politics, as ever, plays a role. Adams would have loved to have done it, although, and of course, for the lawyers on the call, and particularly for our distinguished jurist, only a lawyer would believe that the reorganization of state governments would be more interesting than we hold these truths to be self-evident. Adams always believed that that was the day where things changed, a couple of days before July 4th. And then Jefferson rolls in with that wonderful rhetorical capacity he had. He had a great bureaucratic ability. It's a great legislative bureaucratic skill. Jefferson could write quickly and he could write well. And I think we all know in our own lives there's something to that. I know journalists, Judy and I know that in particular. Uh, our mutual friend Evan Thomas, when he first went to Time magazine, realized that as a writer for a magazine, you simply wanted to be faster than the best person and better than the fastest. And that would get you that would get you ahead. And that's where Jefferson was. And so Virginia, Adams believed that Massachusetts should not take the lead. It was seen as too forward leaning in the cause. Virginia, substantial colony, not seen as radical. Having this come from the pen of a Virginian mattered enormously politically, and that was Adams's insight. Regretted it the rest of his life, by the way, but that was the political insight at the moment.
Yeah, because I had heard that Adams, really kind of buttered up Thomas Jefferson to get him to write it with several arguments, one of which he thought that a Southerner needed to write it. And then I had heard, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, John, that he told Jefferson, "You're a better writer than I am."
Right. The first and last time John Adams ever said that to Thomas Jefferson.
Yes. Well, Judge, I wanted to turn to you. 56 men signed the Declaration of Independence, and about 25 of them, almost half, were lawyers. Why do you think that is, and what is the significance of lawyers being part of that declaration?
Well, Mary, I think that John just gave us the answer to that. This was an effort to establish a new government and a new nation under laws, not men, and that is uniquely an enterprise for lawyers then, just as it is today. Lawyers, of course, don't have a corner on the market of brilliant writing, anything but they may have a corner on the market of brilliant writing about the law and legal matters. And in this instance, 250 years ago, the legal organization and writing that legal organization and the rights and our liberties into a Constitution of the United States 11 or 12 years later was uniquely a role for the lawyers among our founders. And I will not take issue with John's characterization of the Committee of Five today, but I will say that we are so honored to have John with us today, and with our task force, a task force that John, I would say to you today, is as distinguished as the Committee of Five was 250 years later.
Well, Judge, I also wanted to ask you, because last year on the 4th of July, you wrote an essay titled The Self-Evident Truths of Freedom and of Tyranny. And your piece draws a distinct parallel between the 27 grievances that are listed in the original Declaration of Independence and the rights, liberties, and freedoms Americans hold today. Would you mind talking a little bit about that essay?
I would love to, Mary. I have, over the past 6 years, have not had hardly a minute to think or write about anything that I particularly wanted to think and write about. Well, last summer I had that opportunity to write about the Declaration of Independence, and did so. I began by studying the Declaration of Independence, really for the first time in my life, studying it, studying every word of it, and trying to learn what was behind every word, and in particular, what was behind the 27 grievances of the American colonists. So that was a long process, enjoyable as anything I've ever done. But at the end of the analysis, I was astonished by the striking overlap and parallels between the 27 grievances that the American colonists had against King George III and the British Empire, and the grievances that Americans today have against their 47th president of the United States. It was, like I said, astonishing, the parallels. And then, of course, standing alone, we Americans have more grievances and more graver grievances against this president than the colonists had against King George III. But once you consider our grievances against the backdrop of America 250 years thence from its founding, those grievances are exponentially greater than were the grievances against King George III. We could go on for an hour discussing those parallels, but for instance, just to take one of the signature initiatives of this president that was addressed by the colonists against the British Crown, tariffs.
Mm.
And then on and on and on. You know, I don't commend it to anyone's attention, but it would be worth reading today and on July 4th and the remainder of this anniversary year. I placed it in my Substack account and for all to read who are interested.
Well, and the task force, we will send out a link to it as well. So thank you, Judge. Judy, I wanted to turn to you. As we are approaching this 250th anniversary, you have been leading a major series titled America at a Crossroads, which examines how the nation's identity has evolved and where it stands today. What made you undertake this series, and what are you seeing from this series?
Well, thank you, Mary. And it goes without saying how what an honor it is for me to be sitting with you and with John and with the judge and the three of you for whom I have so much respect and admiration. So I'm really happy to be here with you and honored. I started this because as I was thinking about stepping away from the anchor desk, which my plan was to do at the end of a few years ago, 2022, I knew I wanted to continue reporting. And the thing that I fixated on was something that in my 50 years of covering politics, I had never seen. And that was a country, a people as divided as I had ever seen them. Now, I wasn't around to cover the Civil War, World War II. I know the country was divided in many ways in times in the past, but what seemed different to me was the dark feelings that people have toward people on the other side and the manner in which the division was being stoked and the ability to stoke it. And I wanted to understand it better, and I really wanted to get out in the country and talk to as many Americans as possible. And so over the last 3.5 years, it started out as a 2-year project. It's now still living, but we went around the country. We've been to more than 30 states. I'm about to head out today to a couple of more states out west. It's literally to sit down with people in their homes and in coffee shops and to talk to them, to community leaders, to historians, to try to understand what is going on. We've profiled members of school boards across America who are at each other's throats over issues around book burning, over LGBTQ, over what to teach in the school, and of course, originally over COVID, the pandemic, which split so many communities, and I think has been has exacerbated what was going on before and has made it even worse. We went to Oregon to interview people who want to join Idaho next door. They want to secede and join what they call Greater Idaho. We've talked to people in Arizona in the Latino community, completely divided about where they stand politically. So we've been to Florida to talk to people who run health clinics only for people who have a certain set of views about how we should be looking after our health. Last year, I wanted to look, Mary, at efforts to bring us together, and there are many of those. They happen to be primarily at the grassroots level, but there are many, many organizations out there, national and local, trying to get people just to sit down, have a cup of coffee or a beer together, just to relearn how to listen to each other, how to have a conversation with someone that doesn't start with an angry disagreement. And this year, I have to say, I am so lucky to be focusing on the 250th. Just last night, I was in Philadelphia at Independence Hall. The public hours were over, and we were inside the assembly room where the founders came together to sign the Declaration, and then 11 years later, the Constitution. And I have to say, I had goosebumps, practically tears in my eyes. I interviewed Lindsay Chervinsky, the head of the George Washington Library at Mount Vernon, and also Ron Chernow, who, of course, is the author of not just Hamilton, but a book about George Washington. Talk to them about what it means at this moment. And so this year, Mary, what I'm trying to do is tie our history to where we are today by talking to as many Americans as possible. I'm heading today out west to prepare to cover the 150th anniversary of the Battle of Little Bighorn, a seminal event in the fate of Native Americans in this country. They celebrate, they observe, I should say, not the 250th, but the 150th. This year is the 150th year since that battle turned the tide for them. So it's been an extraordinary opportunity, and we want to keep going because to me the story is as big as 320 million Americans who live here.
Oh, thanks, Judy. Thanks. I mean, what a wonderful event last night that you were at Constitution Hall. And thanks so much for including Native Americans in the story because they're not always included. I'm Native American, so I really appreciate that. Well, I wanted to turn and talk about what has been called the most important sentence ever written. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. John, what did the drafters envision with this sentence?
Right. It was the mission statement of the country. It was, in many ways, I think and Judge Ludig has been studying this, so I'll defer to him very quickly. But it was a Lockean sentence. It came out of a recent Enlightenment, uppercase E, thinking about which I believe has deep roots in particularly in biblical and ancient tradition, that we were not born to live in civil societies that were vertical, that where popes and princes and prelates and kings were to be at the top, and there was to be an inherited order in which your place of birth was commensurate with the civil rights you were allowed to enjoy and exercise. That in fact the world was shifting from being seen as vertical to being seen as more horizontal. That we were in fact all creatures of God. We stood equal before the law and before the bar of history. It did not mean that our outcomes and our success and our prosperity would be equal, but it did mean that when it came time to be judged by our peers and by the rule of law, there would be no special privileges. There would be no one who had a leg up on anyone else. And I believe, perhaps hyperbolically, but I still believe it, that that shift from society being organized vertically to more horizontally, however unevenly and imperfectly, and we're still working on it. But that shift was, in fact, that the American Revolution gave the fullest political manifestation to that shift. It was one that began in many ways with Gutenberg, with the democratization of information. Magna Carta is part of this conversation. The Protestant Reformations, the translation of sacred scripture into the vernacular, the scientific revolution, the European Enlightenment, the Scottish moral enlightenment, an entire reorientation of the world from being seen as top to bottom to being seen from side to side.
Hmm. Well, Judge, I wanted to ask, how does this sentence, this one sentence, underlie our entire legal system?
Well, Mary, it's self-evident. Those soaring, uh, aspirational and inspirational words are literally the foundational words for the United States of America. Uh, we secured our independence from the British Crown by the Revolutionary War in order to uh, establish a government, a democracy, and a government uh, under laws, not men. Uh, and the, that law, which became the Constitution of the United States, was written to ensure those rights and liberties that John was just referencing, including the right to be treated equally under the law. So there are no more foundational words for the American Republic than those that we're discussing.
Well, Judy, I know you've been talking to many, many people around the country, and how have these ideals of the Declaration, that of liberty, equality, and self-governance, been interpreted, contested, and sometimes distorted over time? What are you seeing from people you're talking to?
Oh, Mary, that's such a big, big question. Because people live, as we know, in so many different sets of circumstances. Their life stories are different. Their, their opportunities are different. I listened to John a moment ago, and the judge just now talk about that sentence. That has not been. It's certainly a reality in the largest sense, or it's real, it is our foundation, but in terms of how people live their lives, there's so many Americans who don't see that opportunity for them to live an equal or anything like an equal life. And so I've spoken with people who are, I'll tell you one quick story, and that is we were in Boston early this year to look at the Battle of Bunker Hill, which of course was the first major battle that kicked off the Revolutionary War. And then 200 years later, Boston is the site of another battle over busing, forced busing to desegregate the public schools, and a federal judge's order. And we found, my wonderful producer found, among others, a mother and daughter. The mother had been one of the plaintiffs in the case that the judge had ruled that ended up in desegregating the schools. The daughter had been in the third grade. She was being bused from their neighborhood where the mother thought the schools were substandard. And she ended up being bused not to better schools, but to a neighborhood that the mother ended up, she said to us, she said, I didn't think they were much better than where we were before. So I regretted what had happened. But I sat with them in their kitchen in a very small house in Dorchester and in Boston. And I talked to them about what they had been through. The daughter described as a third grader entering this school soon after the schools were segregated and being there with her classmates. And she was spit on by an older woman as she went in. There was an angry crowd around the school. And her friend came running up to her, and the mother and daughter were black. The friend happened to be white. The friend came running up to her and said, I am so sorry. My grandmother can be very rude sometimes, and I apologize for her. This happened when she was a child. She said she never forgot it. So as I sat in the kitchen, the last thing I asked these two strong women who had been through this and who knew Boston's story, I said, well, what does it mean to you right now to be an American citizen at this time in our country and with everything you've been through? And they both said, we love this country for all of its flaws. We wouldn't want to live anywhere else. And so I think that thread runs through so many of us. Despite its flaws, we still love this country. But I also know, I look at the polls of younger Americans. They don't feel that sort of straight line of loyalty to this country. They look at what needs to be improved. And so, your question is, as I said, is a big one. And I think we need to be able to hold two things in our mind at one time, that we as a country have fallen short in many ways, and we still have a long way to go to realize that sentence, all men are created equal.
Well, Judge, thank you, Judy, for that. Judge, I wanted to ask you, because one piece of history was just brought up to me, and I might have never known it, but one part of John Adams' history, which might not be known by everyone, I know I had probably forgotten it, but he actually defended, as a lawyer, British soldiers who had massacred people in Boston because he believed that everyone had a right to a fair trial and legal counsel, even in a revolutionary climate. He said, counsel ought to be the very last thing that an accused person should want in a free country, and that every lawyer must hold himself responsible not only to his country, but to the highest and most infallible of all tribunals for the part he should act. Would you mind talking about that? And do you think something like that would happen today where a person who had defended our enemies as a lawyer would end up as president?
Uh, John Adams, of course, was the quintessential lawyer for America and of America for the reasons that he stated in that quote. He did it. He did what lawyers in America are supposed to do, and they largely have done for almost 250 years now, until the past 10 years, let's just say. That is lawyers throughout America for 250 years have honored their oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States and the rule of law in America. Full stop. Until recently, when, for reasons that we all know, the law itself has become politicized, uh, partisan politics, and that has corrupted the not only the rule of law in America, but it's corrupted the legal profession. So that today, as you suggested, um, there are many lawyers who will refuse to support and defend the Constitution of the United States and the rule of law in America because they believe that to do so is political and partisan. That is, they don't recognize the difference between politics and law anymore, and therefore they are unwilling to support their own oath that they took. So to answer your rhetorical question, no. Today, you would never get many lawyers in our profession to represent political figures on the other side of the political aisle from themselves. But Mary, the profession of law is a noble profession, and it always has been, and it will always be into the future. But today, for lawyers, not just for lawyers, but for all Americans, on this, the 250th anniversary of America's founding, the time of testing has come for America. Prophetically, I suppose, one could say that on this 250th anniversary, a quarter of a millennium since our founding, America has been presented suddenly with two very different visions of America and America's future. And Americans must decide today, this year, which vision of America they want. What do they want America to be in the future for the next 250 years? And what they do not want America to be for the next 250 years. Their decision is obviously of paramount significance. Americans' decision today will determine literally whether this nation, so conceived and so dedicated, will long endure.
Well, that leads me to you, John. The judge talked about two visions going on in America right now. And so, in terms of where we are in our country right now, John, what do you think the founders would think? Would they be surprised?
I think they'd be surprised, and I hope everyone will weigh in on this. I think they'd be surprised it took this long for this crisis of such scope and depth. I think they recognized in the framing of the Constitution, more so than the Declaration, that we're driven by appetite and ambition. We're driven largely by self-interest. Uh, I have a personal view that the Constitution is as much a theological document as it is a legal one. It is predicated on the assumption, largely coming from John Witherspoon, the president of the College of New Jersey, which became Princeton. We think of it as the Vanderbilt of New Jersey, who taught so many of the framers and founders recognized in that Calvinistic way the depravity of man, which was his phrase he repeated in his lectures. And we've talked a lot about the great John Adams, who I many biographers have wisely observed that Adams understood his own faults, understood his own vanity, understood his own ambition, and knew that he needed guardrails as well. And he wonderfully, for all of us, projected forward, realizing that human nature, if he felt this way, other people probably did too. And so I believe we're in a, and I don't want to be overly grand about this, but I believe this is as much a moral crisis as anything else, because it seems to me, and again, I'll defer to the lawyers in the conversation, you can't draft any document, you can't draft any statute that covers every possibility, right? There's always going to be a role for custom and ethos in how we run a big, disputatious, complicated polity. And if we don't have the willingness of heart and mind to defer not just to the substance of the laws, but to the spirit of the laws, then civil society, as we understand it, and as Judge Ludig has done so much over the last decade to articulate, eh, it doesn't work because this is America is, we say America is an idea, and we often mean that in this wonderful Jeffersonian sense. It's also, a, there's an informality to the covenant that we have to defer to others, even when it's, and actually, particularly when it's not in our immediate interest. And that's moral. It's how we are with each other. And so, if I had one wish for this commemoration, season of commemoration, it would be for us to remember that democracies, like human life, requires give and take. And that's really hard because it's a lot more fun to take than to give. That's been true since the second chapter of Genesis. But the point is that at our best, we have managed to give so that we could preserve our capacity to prosper together.
Well, John, that kind of leads me in past interviews, you stress that the Declaration is not just a historical artifact, but a civic reference point. You encourage Americans to engage with it critically, recognizing both its lofty ideals and the unresolved moral questions that you just mentioned of the founding era. And this approach fosters a deeper, more inclusive understanding of American democracy. Would you mind elaborating on that?
Well, very quickly, it has been the North Star. So from 1776, it's it's rendered, it's out there. Jeremy Bentham and others scorned it. Uh, Samuel Johnson, remember, famously said, "Why is it we hear the loudest cries for liberty from those who drive Negroes?" Um, they saw our hypocrisy, and we are hypocrites. I don't want to drag y'all into this. I know I am. If I do the right thing half the time, that's a hell of a good day, and I don't have that many of them. So why would the country, which is the fullest manifestation of all of us, be a whole lot different? But that sentence endures. So at Seneca Falls, where do they land? We hold these truths that all men and women are created equal. It comes in one of the most amazing American moments. It sustains Frederick Douglass. Imagine the faith it took for a man born into enslavement in the middle of the 19th century to say, "I, for one, do not despair of the Republic. The fiat of the Almighty, let there be light, has not yet spent its force." Why on earth would he not despair of the Republic heading into the Tawney Dred Scott decision? And yet there he was. He called the Constitution a glorious liberty document. He called the Declaration the ring bolt of the nation's destiny. Uh, of course, Abraham Lincoln leaps over the Constitution at Gettysburg and goes back to the Declaration as the founding moment. That was why we were here. Franklin Roosevelt frames the Second World War, both the Atlantic Charter and when he dedicated the Jefferson Memorial in 1943, he said Jefferson lived in a world where freedom of conscience was in the dock, as do we. And where does Dr. King ground the sermon on Wednesday, August 28th, 1963? But we pray that the country will live out the true meaning of its creed, that all men are created equal. It recurs again and again. At the risk of blasphemy, I will say it is, in Pauline Mayer's phrase, American scripture. And what scripture has done in human affairs from the very beginning is been an injunction and a guide, often more violated than followed, but it has always been the centering element of different human communities. And the Declaration continues to be the centering element. Ideally, to go to Judy's got actual facts and reporting. I'm usually unburdened by that. Um, if it's parchment and someone's dead, I'm all over it. Uh, that's but we are centered by it. It's the reason folks go to church. Folks go to church to hear something that they know is familiar, but they know they need to hear it because they have to rededicate themselves to a very complicated human enterprise, which is to give as well as to take. I think that sociological dynamic is true in civil society as well.
Well, thank you for talking about the enduring resilience of the Declaration and bringing up Frederick Douglass and Franklin Delano Roosevelt and setting that in context. So looking ahead, Judge, I wanted to turn to you because you have said in the past, we must dedicate ourselves to the great task that yet remains before us 250 years later. You said, "'Tis ours only to transmit this goodly land and this political edifice of liberty to the latest generation that fate shall permit the world to know." What did you mean by this?
Well, Mary, those are, of course, the words of the 16th President of the United States, Abraham Lincoln, from his Gettysburg Address. But what I want to say is this. John Meacham has written many powerful, prophetic words about America and the American ideal, but perhaps none more powerful than those that he just spoke today. Would that John could transcribe all those words into a pamphlet in 2026, just like Thomas Paine did in Common Sense in 1776, and distribute them around the country to every American citizen to read, while each and every one of us decides in this anniversary year what we want our America to be in the future.
Well, thanks, Judge. Yes, I think that would be apt to distribute common sense pamphlets. And so, with that, Judy, you are actually talking to people. So, what are you hearing from people about the meaning of citizenship, the responsibilities that come with it, and how the nation's ideals should be lived?
Again, such another wonderful and big question, Mary. I think in many ways people have tuned out what it means to be a citizen. I know when I've had conversations with folks, some are very engaged in their communities. They're very engaged in thinking about the kinds of things we're talking about in this conversation that we're having right now. There are others who are consumed with just getting bread on the table, holding down 2 or 3 jobs a day, and not thinking, not having the time, taking the time to sit and think, what's my role? Can I make sure to be registered to vote? What do I think about the issues confronting my community? And that to me is a growing challenge in our country, because we want citizens to be involved. I believe John could answer this better than I had. I can I believe the founders expected Americans to take as great an interest as possible in the affairs of the country, realizing that they had lives to lead and that they wouldn't be able to pay the closest possible attention. I think that becomes a bigger and bigger challenge today, as our attention is torn in so many different ways. We are caught up in the political arguments of the time, as we always have been. So I am concerned. I'm concerned about our education system. You want young people to learn about our history, to learn about their civic responsibility. You want them to grow up to understand why it matters that they pay attention. And I think many do, and many Americans do vote, but there are many, in my view, too many others who don't. And whether it's because they think the system, it isn't worth it, that the system is, quote, rigged, that the system is uh, is uh, is there to help somebody else and not them, and they've kind of given up on it. Whatever the reason, or but they just don't have time. We need to address that and think about that as one of our challenges going forward. I would think that our presidents, our congressional state leaders should be giving thought to how do we keep the American people engaged, and reminding them they have a responsibility as citizens. It's not just our elected leaders and appointed leaders. It's every citizen of this country has a responsibility to take part in this amazing enterprise, this representative democracy that is so precious, as we've just been discussing. It's so precious and fragile, and we have to pay attention. We have to stay engaged. We really have no choice.
Mary, can I ask,
Thanks for that. Oh, go ahead.
this is the right group of folks I think, to suggest this to. I'm not a lawyer. I come from a long line of them, but I sobered up and escaped the rock like Indiana Jones going out of the cave. But continuing legal education is a critical part of your profession, right?
Yes.
Why don't we have continuing citizenship education?
Yeah.
And as your task force works on things, I wonder if there's something there. We do most of our teaching of history, and insofar, to go to Judy's point, insofar as the civics we do transmit, we do it all and we stop just at the moment it becomes really important, when people can vote. And then we just let them loose into the media environment that I won't drag the distinguished lawyers into it, but Judy and I have been part of this. And I'm not sure our legacy is, not personally, but I don't think our generation's legacy is all that great, given the inherent economically driven partisanship of so much of the political information world. Um, I've been thinking about this in incoherent ways, but how do we continue to get people to engage in very basic, both civics and historical case studies that enable people to perhaps look at the unfolding present with an appreciation of what's worked and what hasn't in the past?
John,
Yeah, that's a great idea. Oh, go ahead,
stay
Judge.
tuned, John. That may have been a quote incoherent thought. It's the exact same thought that George Washington himself had when he was president of the United States. His dream for America, in fact, I think it would be fair to call it his last and final dream for America, was to create a national university, to teach Americans about America and the American idea, citizenship, character, and leadership. It's my dream to help create that George Washington's National University in my remaining years here on this earth. And if I get the opportunity, the first people I'm going to talk to about it are you and Judy Woodruff.
Well, and I think
I
that's
speak for Woodruff. We're ready.
I think that's part of the reason the judge stepped up to be co-chair of the task force. In our small way, we're trying to do that. And of course, there's a lot of programs for K through 12, like iCivics. And I know one of our other task force members, Richard Haas, he wrote a book called, The Obligations of Citizens, and he has a curriculum for college level people. So there are some efforts, but I see your point of John and Judge. Well, we're running to the end. I have a few final questions for all of you. Just to end on a few notes, what I'm going to ask all of you each of this, and I will start with Judy on this one. What gives you hope for the future of American democracy?
The American people. We've been through so much, not the folks so much, the folks who are living today, and certainly those who lived before us. But we have, as long as we hold true to the values that John and the judge have just been so eloquently laying out and reminding us about, we have the ability to continue to do great things in this country to serve the people who need our support and our help, to support one another, to have great leaders. We have that ability in ourselves as a because of this incredible system of government that we have. We have the freedom. It's almost as if we have the writ. And so as I travel around the country, as I said, a lot of people are busy just getting through the day, getting the children off to school, and so forth. At the same time, you meet people who are working so hard, who are volunteering, who are giving their time at food banks, who are doing all manner of things to keep their community strong, and so that's where my hope is. It's among the people.
And John, I'll ask you, what gives you hope for the future of American democracy?
I'm going to fall back on Winston Churchill, half American, who said in one of the last things we know that he genuinely wrote and was fully engaged in the fourth volume of the History of the English-speaking Peoples, he observed that the future is unknowable, but the past should give us hope. And my sense is that those who, because the people in the past were not saints, but were imperfect, and yet at the hour of, to use a phrase the judge used a moment ago, in their time of testing, they managed to make the union a little more perfect. Because they did it, facing headwinds, facing appetites, and we face headwinds and appetites, I think we can do it too.
And Judge, how about you?
Well, Mary, Judy and I have been traveling the country for these past number of years, searching for hope, searching for sources of hope. And for most of those years, I, for one, was reluctant. I couldn't see hope. But most recently, I have begun to see hope. The American people have now risen to their feet to protest what they are witnessing in America today. and they will not take a seat again until they have absolved America of what has occurred over the past decade. In that, I find the ultimate hope.
Well, just a couple more questions. I'm going to ask this one to John and Judy. How do you hope everyone celebrates the 4th of July this year? Judy?
Oh my goodness. Well, they don't they don't have to go to fireworks. I would say read the Declaration of Independence or pick up one of John Meacham's history books. Pick up one of the speeches written by Judge Ludig. Pick up something that reminds you of what this country's all about, and spend a few minutes or longer if you can reading that. And if you have young children, read it to them.
John?
I salute, of course, Judy's generous plug there, but also say contemplate the alternative. Is there a place you'd want to go? Is there some other place on earth, all in all, one would rather be? And the answer may be yes. For me, it's no. But once that question's answered, then you can begin with, I think, a fuller heart to turn yourself to the reform and repair that we need to do.
Well, the final question I'm going to ask each of you, and I'm going to give the judge the last word. What would you like to leave our audience with today, Judy?
Just just to believe in this country, to know that the American experiment, while imperfect, is one that we all just have to keep working on and working through, because it matters so much for future generations.
John?
How do you want to be remembered? As Lyndon Johnson said to George Wallace, leaning over him in March of 1965, in the middle of
Mm.
Bloody Sunday, George, when you go, do you want a piney little scrawny grave that says George Wallace he hated? Or do you want a great noble sepulcher that says George Wallace he built?
Mm.
I want us to be with the builders and not the scrawny.
And Judge, I'm going to give the last word to you. What do you want to leave our audience with today?
Mary, it's easy. If Americans but have the courage of their convictions to overcome their fears, the fears that they have today about what they are witnessing, and their fears as a consequence of the future, if they have but the courage to overcome those fears and speak collectively as we the people, then there's no doubt that America will long endure.
Well, thank you all. I feel very uplifted. What an important and timely conversation. I wish we had more time because I so enjoyed this. You all were so eloquent and right on point about everything. Thank you so much to all of you. And so I'll just say to our audience, if you enjoyed this program, please go to the Task Force for American Democracy's website at www.democracy-taskforce.org and sign up for our newsletter and our future programs. We're going to be presenting future webinars, and we hope you will join us. We're taking a little break in July and August, and we'll be back in September. So wishing everyone a wonderful 4th of July. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.